Vanessa's cruel laughter echoed across the crowded ballroom the moment she saw my dress. $18, she mocked. That navy dress is so cheap. Did you find it at a yard sale? How embarrassing. A few people laughed along. I felt every eye in the room drilling into my wrinkled navy dress, the one I had stayed up all night fixing by hand, because it was the only decent thing I could afford. My son Michael stood beside me and said nothing. My throat tightened. I grabbed my purse and rushed toward the exit before anyone could see the tears welling up. Then suddenly, the entire room fell completely silent. The CEO of Whitmore Capital, Charles Whitmore himself, walked straight toward me and hugged me tightly, like family. Before we continue, let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever been judged for the way you looked, dressed, or lived by the very people who should have loved you the most? If this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is in your city right now. I love reading your stories and hearing your voices. I live in a tiny one-story house on the west side of San Antonio, Texas. The paint around the windows is peeling, and the front porch creaks under every step. Most people drive right past homes like mine without ever noticing them. But to me, that little house holds 40 years of memories. Every morning I still wake up at 5:30 out of habit, even though nobody needs breakfast packed anymore. I brew my coffee in the same chipped ceramic mug my husband Thomas bought me at a flea market 32 years ago. The painted words, "World's Best Mama," are almost entirely faded now. I trace the letters with my thumb as the house sits in total silence. Silence gets louder when you grow older, especially after losing the one who filled these rooms with life. Thomas died 9 years ago from heart failure. One moment, he was in his favorite chair watching baseball, and the next, my entire world was collapsing inside the back of an ambulance. After the funeral, people kept whispering the same comfort to me. "You still have Michael." And I did. My son was my pride, my purpose, the sole reason Thomas and I worked ourselves half to death. Thomas spent 30 years pouring concrete under the brutal Texas sun. His knees gave out before he even turned 60. His back never recovered from the construction accidents he ignored because we desperately needed the overtime pay. As for me, I took any job I could find, cleaning motel rooms, mending uniforms, altering wedding gowns, and sewing hems until my fingers literally bled. I used to sit at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, my sewing machine rattling away while little Michael slept on the couch, just to be close to me. Sometimes I would look at him sleeping with his math books on his chest and whisper to myself, "He is going to have a better life." That single dream kept me going during the tough years when we barely had enough groceries in the fridge. There were nights Thomas and I pretended we had already eaten so Michael could have seconds. We thought he never noticed, but children always notice. Michael was incredibly brilliant from the start. His teachers adored him. He earned scholarships, awards, and opportunities we never could have dreamed of. The day he got accepted into a top business school, Thomas cried harder than I had ever seen. He held Michael's acceptance letter in shaking hands, repeating, "Our boy made it." But success changes people slowly, not overnight. At first, Michael still called me every single night. Then it was every weekend. Then once every couple of weeks. Eventually, our conversations became rushed and formal, like he was talking to a distant relative instead of his mother. "I'm busy, Mom. I'll call you later. Things are crazy at work." Those painful words became all too familiar. Then Vanessa entered his life. The first time I met her, she wore a designer cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my entire monthly mortgage payment. She smiled politely, but there was a coldness behind her eyes, as if she had already measured my worth the second she saw my small home. She hugged me carefully, as if my poverty might rub off on her skin. At dinner, she kept asking questions that sounded polite, but really weren't. "So, Michael grew up here? You actually sewed all these curtains yourself? This neighborhood must have changed so much." I knew exactly what she really meant. How did someone like you raise someone like him? But Michael looked happy, so I swallowed my pride. That is what mothers do. We swallow our pain so our children can keep smiling. After they married, things grew worse without Michael even noticing. Vanessa absolutely hated when I visited unexpectedly. She detested my old-fashioned clothes. She hated my accent whenever I spoke Spanish too quickly. Once, during Thanksgiving dinner at their house in Dallas, I overheard her whispering to a friend in the kitchen. "Michael's mother is sweet," she murmured softly. "But honestly, she's just a little rough around the edges." They laughed quietly. I pretended not to hear. Because when you love someone deeply, you learn to endure those small humiliations. Still, no matter how distant Michael became, I never stopped being incredibly proud of him. Every month, I met my friend Rosa for coffee at a little bakery downtown. And every single month, I showed her new photos of Michael at his conferences, Michael shaking hands with executives, Michael standing beside luxury cars. "He works so hard," I would tell her with a proud smile. And I meant it every single time, even if he barely called anymore, even if my birthdays became brief text messages instead of visits, even if I sat staring at my silent phone for hours, wondering if I should call first. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I was hemming a blue bridesmaid dress for a customer when I heard the heavy mail slot clang open. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked slowly to the door. Mixed in with the bills and grocery coupons was a cream-colored envelope with elegant, sweeping handwriting. It had a New York return address. My chest tightened instantly. I carried it carefully over to the kitchen table before opening it. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "Dear Abigail, I hope you are well. I still think about your kindness more often than you could ever know. I might finally have the chance to repay a small part of my debt to you. Hope to see you soon. C.W." I stared at those initials for the longest time. Then, folding the letter neatly, I placed it in the wooden drawer beside several others just like it. I never told Michael about those letters. I never told anyone. Some secrets are too sacred to explain, too precious to leave in careless hands. That evening, I stood washing dishes at the sink while the Texas sunset cast a warm, orange light across the kitchen. For the first time in months, my phone rang. "Michael." A soft smile touched my lips before I even swiped to answer. "Hi, sweetheart." A quiet pause hung on the line. Then he cleared his throat. "Mom, there is a company gala next weekend. Vanessa and I were hoping you could come." My heart swelled so fast, it actually ached. For a second, I honestly thought I was imagining my son's phone call. After hanging up, I stood alone in the quiet kitchen, pressing the phone to my chest as tears blurred my eyes. It had been ages since my son invited me anywhere important. Not out of pure obligation, not for some rushed holiday dinner or because someone forced his hand. He actually wanted me there, or at least that was the story I told myself. I barely slept a wink. The next morning, I opened my closet and stared at the few dresses hanging inside. Most were just old church clothes or outfits I had worn to funerals and local events. Nothing seemed right for a high-end corporate gala packed with wealthy executives. I gently touched each hanger anyway. A mother never wants to embarrass her child, especially one she gave up everything to raise. 3 days later, I boarded the bus downtown to a discount store near the highway. Buzzing fluorescent lights hummed overhead while groups of teenagers drifted past the clearance racks, completely ignoring the world around them. I spent almost an hour acting like a casual browser while quietly checking each price tag twice. Finally, tucked near the back, I spotted it. A simple navy blue dress with long sleeves, soft fabric, and a quiet elegance. The tag said $18. I held it up in the mirror. It was not glamorous, but it possessed a real dignity, and that matters when you reach my age. I bought it, carrying it home wrapped in tissue paper like a treasure. That night, I gently laid the dress across my kitchen table, beneath the warm yellow light. One sleeve required stitching. The hem was uneven, and a loose thread dangled near the zipper. Most people would never notice those little imperfections, but decades of sewing had trained my eyes too well. I threaded my needle and started fixing each detail by hand. As I stitched, old memories drifted through my mind, the way they always do when my hands are occupied. I remembered sewing Michael's Halloween costumes when we could not afford store-bought ones. I remembered patching the holes in his school jeans late at night. I remembered crafting a tie for Thomas from leftover fabric because we could not buy one for a wedding. Back then, money was tight, but we still had pride and love. That matters far more than people realize. Around 10 that night, my phone buzzed. Michael. I smiled instantly and answered, "Hi, sweetheart." His voice sounded distracted. "Hey, Mom, just checking if you got the invitation email." "Yes," I said warmly. "Thank you for inviting me." A brief silence followed. Then he cleared his throat. "Listen, this gala is a pretty big deal. There will be investors there, senior partners, lots of important people." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. "I understand, Michael. And Vanessa has been so stressed planning everything," he added quickly. "So just do not take anything personally if she seems overwhelmed." I looked down at the navy dress resting on my lap. "Oh," I said softly. "Of course." Another pause. Then he said something that cut deeper than expected. "Maybe keep things simple, okay?" Simple. I knew exactly what he meant. Do not talk too much. Do not act too comfortable. Do not remind them where I came from. But I swallowed the pain before it could show in my voice. "I will behave myself," I said gently. Michael laughed awkwardly. "That is not what I meant." But it was. After hanging up, I sat in the quiet room for a long time. Then I picked up my needle and kept sewing. Because mothers forgive small wounds far too easily, the next afternoon I retrieved my jewelry box from the drawer. Inside lay the pearl earrings Thomas gave me for our 20th anniversary. They were not real pearls. We both knew that. But Thomas had saved up for months to buy them. "You deserve beautiful things too," he had whispered, fastening them onto my ears. I cradled the earrings in my palm now, smiling sadly. "Help me look respectable, Tommy," I whispered into the quiet room. By Friday, the dress was finished. I hung it on the closet door and stepped back to admire it. It still looked cheap, but it was clean, graceful, and loved. And somehow that mattered deeply to me. On Saturday morning, Vanessa called out of nowhere. I almost spilled my coffee reaching for the phone. "Hello, Abigail." Her voice sounded unusually sweet. Far too sweet. "Yes, dear. I just wanted to remind you the gala starts at 7 sharp. Do not be late." "I won't." "And one more thing," she added lightly. "The event is very formal." "I understand." "We are trying to maintain a certain image." There it was, the real warning beneath her polite tone. I gripped the phone tighter. "I will do my best," I said softly. Vanessa laughed quietly. "I am sure you will." The second the call ended, a heavy weight settled deep inside my chest. It was not fear exactly, just an uneasy warning. Still, I refused to let dark thoughts ruin this opportunity. For the rest of the weekend, I forced myself to focus on hopeful thoughts. Maybe Michael really wanted me there. Maybe things were finally turning around. Maybe this gala could finally heal the distance growing between us. On Sunday evening, my friend Rosa stopped by with sweetbread fresh from the bakery. Seeing my dress hanging nearby, her eyes went wide. "Oh, Abigail, you look beautiful." I laughed softly. Beautiful is not the word I would use. "Yes, it is." She stepped closer and gently touched the sleeve. "You fix this yourself, of course. You always make things look richer than they are." Her words lingered long after she left. That had always been my life. Making something beautiful out of almost nothing. Late that night, unable to sleep, I stood before the bathroom mirror, wearing it for the first time. I adjusted my earrings, smoothed the fabric over my waist, and turned slowly. An old woman stared back at me, gray streaks in my dark hair, lines around my tired eyes, hands shaped by decades of hard labor. But there was quiet strength there, too. I thought of Michael as a little boy reaching for my hand on his first day of school. I remembered Thomas smiling proudly at graduations. I thought about all the years we had survived together. Then, a painful realization hit me. I was not nervous about wealthy strangers judging me. I was terrified my own son already did. Next morning, while folding laundry, my phone buzzed again. An unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Hello?" A calm male voice replied instantly. "Mrs. Hernandez." "Yes, this is Jonathan Reed, assistant to Mr. Charles Whitmore." My heart stopped. "I am sorry," I whispered. "Who?" "Mr. Whitmore asked me to confirm your attendance at the gala next Saturday." I slowly sat down. How did he know I was invited? A brief silence followed before the assistant answered carefully. "Ma'am, Mr. Whitmore has hoped to see you for a very long time." The gala was at the Grand Meridian Hotel in downtown Dallas. I had never seen such extravagance. The building looked like a palace of glass and gold. Valets in black uniforms opened luxury car doors beneath enormous crystal chandeliers hanging outside the entrance. Women stepped out wearing designer gowns and diamonds brighter than the city lights. And there I was, clutching my old brown purse, wearing an $18 dress. For several seconds, I stood frozen near the sidewalk as luxury cars pulled up behind me, one after another. Suddenly, I felt painfully aware of every wrinkle in my clothes, every gray hair. I almost ran home, but remembered Michael's voice inviting me. "Mom, maybe you could come. Maybe." It was not warm, but it kept me standing there. I took a deep breath, thanked the driver, and walked toward the entrance. Inside smelled of expensive perfume and polished marble. Soft piano music floated through the air as elegantly dressed guests laughed beside towering floral arrangements. Everything looked flawless, including everyone except me. I spotted Michael almost immediately near the grand ballroom entrance. He wore a tailored black tuxedo that cost more than my monthly income. For a brief moment, pride temporarily erased my deep anxiety. That was my little boy, my Michael, who used to run barefoot through the sprinklers in our tiny yard. Now, he belonged on magazine covers. When he finally noticed me, his smile appeared a little too slowly. "Mom," he said, kissing my cheek quickly, "you made it. You look handsome," I whispered. "Thanks." His eyes flickered toward my dress. Not admiration, evaluation. I caught the hesitation before he forced another smile. "You look nice." Nice. The word people use when they do not mean beautiful. Before I could answer, Vanessa appeared at his side in a silver gown that hugged her body perfectly. Diamonds glittered around her neck under the ballroom lights. She looked like she had never worried about grocery prices a day in her life. "Abigail," she said brightly, too brightly. "You came." I smiled politely, of course, as her eyes ran slowly over my dress. I watched her note the cheap fabric, the hand-stitched sleeve, my old shoes. Something smug flashed across her face before vanishing beneath another polished smile. "Well," she said lightly, "I suppose simple elegance never goes out of style." I knew a subtle insult, but years of hardship taught me how to smile through it. "Thank you," I replied gently. Vanessa immediately looped her arm through Michael's. "We should introduce her to a few people," she whispered, not quietly enough. Michael nodded awkwardly. Vanessa guided me through clusters of wealthy guests, introducing me with the same tense smile every single time. "This is Michael's mother, not Abigail, not Mrs. Hernandez, just his mother. An attachment, a footnote." Some shook my hand politely. Others barely glanced at me before returning to conversations about investments and private schools. Then, a woman wearing emerald earrings asked where I lived. "San Antonio," I answered warmly. "Oh," she said. That single word carried an entire judgment. Another man asked if I had retired. "I still do sewing work from home sometimes," I explained. His smile tightened instantly. You could see people mentally placing me in a lower category the moment they heard the word sewing. Funny how wealth decides who deserves respect. Eventually, Michael drifted away to speak with executives. Vanessa followed, leaving me standing entirely alone beside a giant arrangement of white roses. While hundreds of strangers moved around me like I was invisible, I grabbed a glass of water from a tray just to keep my hands busy. Then I noticed several people staring at me, not mockingly, but curiously. An older gentleman near the ballroom entrance narrowed his eyes, as if trying to remember me. Another gray-haired woman whispered quietly to her husband, glancing my way. I assumed they were judging my appearance too. But then, something strange happened. A hotel staff member approached me cautiously. He looked to be around 65, wearing a sharp black uniform and silver-rimmed glasses. The moment he stopped in front of me, his face completely changed. "Recognition?" "Mrs. Hernandez?" he asked softly. I blinked in surprise and nodded. His eyes widened immediately. Oh my goodness, he whispered. I knew it was you. I stared back, completely confused. I'm sorry, do we know each other? He smiled warmly. No, ma'am, but I've seen your photograph before. A sudden chill ran through me. A photograph? Before he could explain, another server called him from across the ballroom. He glanced back, clearly reluctant to leave. I apologize, he said quickly. It's just, Mr. Whitmore speaks very highly of you. My heart stopped for a beat. Charles Whitmore. Just hearing that name dragged up ghosts from my past. The waiter bowed respectfully and hurried away. I stood frozen. I could feel it in the air. Something strange was unfolding tonight, something far bigger than I could comprehend. Mom. I turned around to see Michael walking back, but this time his face was tense. Everything okay? He asked quietly. Yes, I said slowly, studying his face. You never mentioned Mr. Whitmore would be attending tonight. Michael looked genuinely puzzled. He owns the company, Mom. Of course he's here. I forced a tight smile. Right, of course. But anxiety was already squeezing my chest. I hadn't laid eyes on Charles Whitmore in over 30 years, not since the night Thomas and I sat with him in our tiny kitchen, listening to him admit he was completely broke. Back then he was exhausted and desperate. Now he was one of the most powerful tycoons in the country. Life rewrites people in ways you have to see to believe. Mom, he murmured, dropping his voice. Just try to relax tonight. I am relaxed. You just seem a little overwhelmed. I nearly laughed. Overwhelmed? I was standing in a room built for people who grew up believing they owned the world. People like me usually slipped in through the service entrance. Still, I nodded. I'm fine, sweetheart. Michael gave me another distracted smile, his eyes drifting over my shoulder to some executives waving him over. I need to handle something. Vanessa will keep you company. But she didn't. The moment Michael stepped away, she leaned close and whispered in my ear. Try not to look so nervous, Abigail. People can smell insecurity. Then she swept away before I could even reply. I stood there, utterly alone, small, invisible, and deeply humiliated. For the first time tonight, I wished I had never agreed to come. I reached into my purse, feeling for the folded handkerchief Thomas used to carry. That simple comfort always grounded me. Before I could compose myself, loud laughter erupted right behind me. It was Vanessa. Deep down, I already knew that sound was the start of a nightmare. Her laughter cut across the ballroom like shattered glass. Cold, sharp, and impossible to ignore. I tried pretending it wasn't about me. Eyes down, I quietly sipped my water as wealthy guests mingled beneath the glowing chandeliers, until my own name echoed through the crowd. Well, Abigail, Vanessa said loudly, flashing a brilliant smile at the growing crowd around her. You never told us where you found that dress. Several wealthy women stared immediately. I froze. Vanessa swirled her champagne, her eyes gleaming with malice. Is it vintage? She sneered. Or perhaps custom-made? A ripple of soft giggles broke out. I knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't a question. It was a performance, and I was the joke. My son was standing nearby, deep in conversation. I prayed he would notice the suffocating tension, but he either didn't see or chose to ignore it. I squeezed out a tight smile. Oh, it's nothing special. Vanessa stepped closer. No, do tell, she insisted. I'm dying to know. An instinct warned me to keep my mouth shut. But I've always been an honest woman, even when it hurts. So I spoke the truth. It was on clearance, I murmured. $18. A brief silence fell. Then Vanessa exploded into laughter. It was loud enough to echo across the room. $18, she gasped, wiping a tear. Soon, others joined in. A man nearby hid his smirk. A woman looked at my cheap fabric with pity. Vanessa just shook her head mockingly. Oh my God, she sighed. Well, that explains everything. More snickers. Shame burned through me so intensely I felt dizzy. Every vulnerability I had tried to hide choked me. The bargain fabric, the scuffed shoes, the tiny seams I had carefully stitched by hand. In a single cruel stroke, my hard work was reduced to a joke. I looked at Michael, pleading silently for him to intervene. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. I saw a flash of raw embarrassment in his gaze, not for my sake, but because he was ashamed of me. He hurried over, whispering, "Vanessa, stop it." But he was wearing a weak, fake smile, desperate to diffuse the situation without making a scene. Vanessa patted his arm playfully. "I'm sorry," she giggled. "I didn't realize we were celebrating thrift store fashion tonight." More quiet chuckles rippled. Michael rubbed the back of his neck, refusing to meet my eyes. "Mom," he muttered, "maybe don't talk about cheap prices here." That cut deeper than the mockery, because in that instant, a terrible truth became clear. My own boy wasn't ashamed of their cruelty. He was ashamed of me. I stared at him, heartbroken. This was the same child who wore thrift store sneakers because it was all I could afford. The boy who cried happy tears when I saved up for a used bicycle. Back then, we were poor together. Now, he acted like poverty belonged only to me. The ballroom noise faded to a blur. I could barely breathe. Vanessa saw the pain on my face, smiling slightly before taking another sip of her champagne. "I just think appearances matter at events like this," she said casually to the group. "Especially when you represent someone important." Represent someone important. Like I was a stain threatening Michael's polished image, I gripped my purse tightly under the table. Inside was Thomas's old handkerchief, neatly folded after all these years. Touching it gently, I remembered another night long ago. Thomas sat beside me at our kitchen table after a wealthy customer had sneered at my handmade clothes. "You listen to me," he had said, holding my face in his rough working hands. "There is nothing shameful about honest struggle." I could almost hear his voice beside me, but the memory only made my chest ache worse. A woman near Vanessa whispered loud enough for me to hear. "She actually admitted the price." Vanessa laughed. "That is the best part." Something in my chest cracked quietly. Not with a loud, dramatic shatter, but enough to change everything. I looked at Michael one last time. He avoided my eyes. Right then, I realized I was completely alone in that room. A waiter glided past with silver trays of champagne, and the glittering ballroom suddenly felt suffocating. Everyone looked beautiful, wealthy, and confident. I felt like a poor old woman pretending to belong somewhere I never should have entered. I slowly stood up. Vanessa noticed right away. "Oh no," she said with fake concern. "You are not upset, are you?" Quieting my trembling hands, I whispered, "No, I am just tired." Michael finally looked at me. "Then you are leaving." He sounded annoyed, not concerned. I nodded softly. It is a long drive back to San Antonio. Vanessa shrugged. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Like I was a business client instead of his mother on his big night. I picked up my purse carefully, praying my tears would hold back until I reached the parking lot. Walking toward the exit, whispered gossip followed me. $18. Did you see those shoes? She is Michael's mother. Each word cut like a knife. Near the entrance, I stopped to steady myself against one of the cold marble columns. My chest ached, not because of those strangers. They cannot truly wound you. Family does. I reached into my bag for my phone to call a cab. Just then, my screen lit up with a text message from an unknown number. I opened it slowly. He is asking for you. My heart stopped. Before I could process it, another text came. Mr. Whitmore just arrived. I stared at the screen, confused. Charles Whitmore. Why would he ask for me after all these years? I looked back at the ballroom. The atmosphere inside suddenly shifted. People stood taller, and the staff began rushing across the floor. A ripple of excitement washed over the guests. The CEO is here. He is entering now. Charles Whitmore has arrived. Vanessa rushed to the center of the room, smoothing her silver gown and painting on a smile. Michael adjusted his tuxedo nervously. Everyone suddenly looked desperate to impress him. But I stood frozen near the exit, my phone trembling in my hand. Because deep down, I knew this single night was going to change absolutely everything. And for the first time since walking in, Vanessa Collins was no longer the most dangerous person here. The ballroom transformed the second Charles Whitmore arrived. Instantly, all the loud chatter faded into quiet, nervous murmurs. Executives straightened their suit jackets. Women adjusted their jewelry, standing taller as if royalty had walked in instead of a businessman. Even the servers moved quicker, sharper, and more alert. By the entrance, I stood frozen against the column, clutching my phone. My pulse hammered so hard against my ribs that it hurt. Mr. Whitmore just arrived. The text felt completely unreal. I had not seen Charles in 35 years. 35, a whole lifetime. I almost fled before he could enter. Part of me wanted to disappear into the dark before old memories surfaced. Yet a deeper part of me, the young girl buried beneath years of struggle and grief, needed to know if he still remembered. Across the ballroom, Vanessa's entire energy shifted. Her cruel amusement vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of elegant poise. She stood at the center, holding Michael's arm and smiling at every wealthy executive who walked past. I watched her obsessively smooth down her silver dress for the third time in under a minute. She wanted to impress Charles Whitmore. Everyone did. Michael caught me staring from the exit and hurried over. "Mom," he muttered. "Where are you going?" I was leaving, but now I paused to study him. I searched his eyes for any guilt, regret, or shame for how they treated me. Instead, he just looked anxious. Not about my feelings, but about appearances. "You should stay," he whispered. "The CEO is about to speak." I almost laughed at the irony. Minutes ago, he let them mock my $18 dress. Now, he suddenly wanted me beside him. "I do not think I belong here," I murmured. Michael sighed, rubbing his temple. "Mom, please do not start. Don't make tonight any harder than it is." The words stung like ice water. Harder? I stared at my son in disbelief. "Did I really embarrass you that much?" I asked quietly. His expression shifted instantly. "That is not what I said." "But it is what you meant." Michael looked away first. That silence told me everything. For several painful seconds, neither of us spoke. The ballroom lights shimmered across his tuxedo, but my mind was suddenly flooded with memories that nearly broke me. Michael at 7, crying because a boy teased his worn-out backpack. Michael at 13, apologizing after I caught him hiding shoe holes with black marker. Michael at 17, promising he would never forget where he came from. And now, here we were, my son draped in absolute luxury, while I stood before him feeling smaller than I had in years. "I never cared about money," I whispered. Michael sighed impatiently. "This isn't about money." "No," I said softly. "It's about shame." His jaw tightened. "You're overreacting." That single sentence hurt worse than Vanessa's cold laughter. Cruelty from strangers is one thing, but being abandoned by your own child is a completely different pain. Before I could reply, Vanessa suddenly stepped in. "There you are," she beamed at Michael. "Charles should arrive any second." Then her gaze drifted to me. "Oh, you're still here?" Still here, as if my very presence was an embarrassment. Michael lowered his voice. "Mom was just leaving." A flash of relief crossed Vanessa's face. "Oh," she said softly. "Well, if you're tired." I looked at her directly for the first time tonight. She was beautiful. Flawless makeup, perfect posture, that wealthy confidence. But underneath it all, I finally saw something else. Fear. Not of me. Fear of losing status. People like her built their whole lives on social approval. They survived on admiration, the way flowers survive on sunlight. And tonight, for once, something threatened her polished image. "I think I should go," I repeated quietly. Michael nodded all too quickly. "Probably for the best." Those 4 words settled into my chest like a final betrayal. Probably for the best. I forced a weak smile to hold back the tears, adjusted my purse, and turned toward the exit. Right then, the ballroom speakers crackled overhead, and a booming voice echoed through the quiet room. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer boomed, "please welcome the chairman of Whitmore Capital Group, Mr. Charles Whitmore." Thunderous applause exploded. Every head turned toward the grand staircase near the entrance, including mine. And suddenly, there he stood, older, gray-haired, distinguished, but unmistakably Charles. He descended the stairs slowly as camera flashes lit up the room. Executives rushed forward, desperate for a handshake or a quick word. But Charles barely seemed to notice them. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for someone. At first, I told myself I was just imagining things. Then his gaze locked right onto me. My breath caught. The music, the applause, the chatter, everything faded away. For one frozen moment, 35 years dissolved into nothing. Charles stared at me with an expression I couldn't fully comprehend. Shock, deep emotion, relief. Then something happened that nobody in that room ever expected, including me. Instead of greeting the board members waiting by the stage, Charles changed his direction completely. The crowd parted automatically as he walked with quick, determined steps straight toward me. Whispers erupted. Where's he going? Who is that woman? Vanessa straightened up, her smile widening as Charles drew near. For one painfully embarrassing second, she actually thought he was coming for her. She even held her head high and adjusted her posture. But Charles never looked at Vanessa, or Michael, or anyone else. His eyes stayed locked on mine. My hands began to tremble as I suddenly remembered the last time I saw him. A desperate young man sitting in my kitchen, with tears in his eyes, admitting he had nothing left. Now, he stood before me as one of America's richest men. When he finally stopped just inches away, the entire room fell dead silent. Confusion washed over my son's face. Vanessa looked utterly stunned. Charles stared at me for several intense, emotional seconds before finally speaking. Abigail. Hearing my name in his voice after all these decades nearly shattered me. I tried to speak, but nothing came. Before anyone could react, Charles stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me, tightly, like family, like pure gratitude, like a man who'd searched for me for far too long. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Champagne glasses froze midair, Vanessa's face completely drained of color. Against my shoulder, I heard Charles whisper words that changed everything. I never forgot what you did. For several seconds, nobody moved. Charles kept holding me in his arms while hundreds of wealthy guests stared at us in absolute, stunned silence. I could literally hear the soft clinking of glasses near the back of the room. That was how deafening the silence had become. When Charles finally stepped back, his hands lingered on my shoulders as if he needed to make sure I was actually real. His eyes were raw, completely overwhelmed. Beneath the polished billionaire standing before me, I saw flashes of the young man he used to be. Abigail, he breathed again, shaking his head in pure disbelief. After all these years, I whispered, struggling for words. You remembered me? Charles gave a quiet, emotional laugh. Remembered you, he replied. There hasn't been a single year of my life where I forgot you. Immediately, a fresh ripple of whispers erupted. Everyone looked completely baffled and desperate to understand why one of the most powerful CEOs in the country was treating an older woman in an $18 dress like she mattered more than anyone else there. I instinctively glanced toward my son. Michael's face had completely lost all its color. Beside him, Vanessa stood frozen in horror. Just minutes ago, she had openly mocked me before the entire crowd. There I was, with the CEO himself standing right beside me, like I actually mattered. Charles slowly faced the crowd, keeping a protective arm around my shoulders. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice steady. I want you to meet the woman who changed my life. The room went dead silent. Vanessa just blinked, stunned. Michael looked like he was suffocating. Near the front, an executive let out a nervous chuckle, assuming it was a joke. But Charles did not smile, not even a bit. Instead, he looked down at me with pure respect. If it were not for Abigail Hernandez, he declared, Whitmore Capital would not exist today. The entire ballroom broke into shocked whispers. I quickly looked down, suffocated by the sudden attention. No, Charles, I quietly murmured. You built this empire all on your own. He shook his head. I built it because you gave me a chance to survive. Suddenly, Michael stepped forward. Sir, he said hesitantly, I am sorry, but there must be some kind of misunderstanding here. Charles turned to face him, and the air instantly grew cold. A misunderstanding? Charles asked softly. Michael swallowed hard. I mean, my mother never mentioned knowing you. Charles stared at my son, then asked, She never told you? No, sir, Michael replied. A shadow of pain crossed Charles's face. He looked at me, completely stunned. You actually kept your promise all these years. I gave him a sad smile. I told you Michael needed to make it on his own. Vanessa looked utterly bewildered now. Her eyes darted between us, desperate to make sense of what was happening before the crowd. Charles turned back to the room. 35 years ago, he began, I was broke, completely ruined. The crowd went dead silent again. I had debt collectors hounding me, banks slamming doors, and investors laughing me out of their offices. He stopped for a beat. At one point, I slept in my car because rent was impossible. Nobody in the room moved. Nobody even dared to breathe. It is rare to hear a billionaire speak so openly about rock bottom. Charles looked at me with deep warmth. And then I met Abigail and her husband Thomas. Hearing my sweet Thomas's name made my chest tighten immediately. They owned a tiny tailor shop in San Antonio, Charles went on. Nothing grand, just honest, decent folks trying to get by. The memories rushed back instantly. Our small shop with its worn-out curtains, Thomas softly humming as he stitched jackets, and the rich scent of coffee and textiles late at night. Back then, we barely got by ourselves, but my Thomas always believed showing kindness mattered far more than our own comfort. Charles smiled, lost in the memory. I walked in during my absolute worst week. My only suit was torn, and I had no money to fix it. He laughed softly. Honestly, I probably looked homeless. A few guests chuckled awkwardly, but nobody interrupted. Most people completely avoided me back then, Charles added quietly. I looked like pure failure. His eyes locked onto mine. But Abigail made me sit down, poured me some coffee, and simply listened. The entire ballroom stayed completely hushed. She sat and listened to me talk for almost 2 hours, he said, about my ideas, the empire I wanted to build, and all the doors slammed in my face. I remembered that night so clearly. A young Charles with tired eyes and trembling hands. Desperate souls carry a heavy, unmistakable sadness. Thomas and I knew that look immediately because we had been there too. I still remember what your husband said, Charles continued. A knot formed in my throat. Charles smiled warmly. He looked right at Abigail and said, Sometimes good people just need a single soul to believe in them. Tears instantly blurred my vision. That was my Thomas, through and through, always believing in others long before they ever believed in themselves. Charles took a slow breath. The next morning, she called me back. I closed my eyes, remembering that fateful day. I remembered it vividly. Thomas and I had stayed up all night, debating if we were completely mad. The money we wanted to give him was almost every dollar we had saved over decades of hard labor. Our rainy day fund, the money for Michael's future, and the very shield keeping us afloat. But Charles felt genuine, and Thomas trusted my intuition with his whole heart. Charles scanned the crowd. Abigail and Thomas handed me an envelope that held almost every penny of their life savings. Shocked gasps rippled through the room. Michael stared in disbelief. while Vanessa looked completely horrified. I kept my eyes on the floor. Hearing it aloud made our sacrifice feel incredibly heavy again. I tried to say no, Charles said quietly. I told them I might fail. His voice wavered. But Abigail said something I never forgot. He turned to face me. You told me if you ever make it, promise you will stay kind. My tears spilled over because I remembered those exact words. Back then, making it big seemed like an impossible dream for all of us. Charles swallowed hard. That money kept my dream alive just long enough for one investor to finally take a chance on me. He paused. A single yes changed everything. The room stayed completely still. I spent decades trying to pay them back, he added softly. I shook my head. You already did. No, he insisted, not by a mile. Beside Vanessa, Michael suddenly looked unsteady on his feet. You gave him your savings? Michael whispered. I looked closely at my son. Yes, Michael, most of it. He stared at me like I was a total stranger, and maybe to him, I was. Children rarely understand the depth of their parents' sacrifices until life forces them to see the truth. Vanessa finally found her voice. But if this is true, she stammered, why would Abigail still live so modestly? Charles turned to her. The tension in the air spiked. In a calm, ice-cold voice, he delivered his answer. Because unlike most people in this room, Abigail Hernandez never measured human value by wealth. Vanessa's face burned bright red. Several guests immediately looked away from her in embarrassment. For the first time all night, Vanessa had absolutely nothing to say. An unnatural quiet settled over the ballroom after Charles spoke. Suddenly, the entire room looked at me differently, not with pity or amusement, but with respect, something people like Vanessa Collins found deeply uncomfortable. I wished they would stop. Attention has always made me uneasy. Thomas used to joke that I could sew wedding gowns for strangers all day, but panic the second someone complimented my blouse. So, while hundreds of eyes stayed fixed on me beneath the glittering chandeliers, I just wanted to disappear back into the quiet life I understood. But Charles wasn't finished. He guided me gently toward a chair near the front. Sit with me, he said softly. I told him I was fine, standing. You've stood long enough in life, he murmured. The tenderness in his voice nearly broke my heart. Slowly, I sat as the whispering continued around us. Michael and Vanessa stood nearby, looking shattered in completely different ways. My son looked confused, while Vanessa looked absolutely terrified. Charles took a glass of water from a server, then turned back toward the crowd. There is something else you all need to understand, he said calmly. I immediately shook my head, whispering his name, but he only smiled gently. No more hiding. Those words settled heavy in my chest. Hiding had become second nature. Hiding struggle, hiding sacrifice, and hiding pain, especially from my son. Charles folded his hands thoughtfully before continuing. When Abigail and Thomas helped me, they weren't wealthy people making a comfortable investment. He paused. They were risking absolutely everything they had. Several guests lowered their eyes, trying to imagine making such a sacrifice. Most of them knew they never would. I stared down at my hands, memories rushing back so vividly that the ballroom faded away. Decades ago, Our little tailor shop sat on a narrow street in San Antonio. Our roof leaked whenever a heavy storm hit. Half our customers paid late because they were struggling too. Some months, Thomas and I barely made enough to cover the bills. Yet, we survived. Barely. I still remember the exact night Charles first walked in. Rain was pouring so hard that water seeped right under the front door. I was hemming a bridesmaid dress while Thomas balanced the books. Then the door opened. A young man stepped inside in a soaked gray suit, a torn sleeve, and pure exhaustion written across his face. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know you're probably closing soon." Thomas looked up and immediately smiled. "No problem, come on in." That was my Thomas, always kind first. Charles explained he needed his jacket fixed before a big morning meeting. "I can pay later," he admitted awkwardly. I saw the humiliation burning in his eyes, his pride deeply wounded by desperation. Thomas glanced at me briefly, then simply said, "We will fix it." No judgment, no suspicion, just pure kindness. While Thomas worked, Charles sat with me at my back sewing table, drinking coffee from a mismatched mug. Somehow, he started opening up about everything. The business he dreamed of building, the technology nobody believed in, the bank rejections, and the mounting debt. The fear of failure was crushing him. "I know how crazy it sounds," he said with a defeated laugh. "Honestly, I think people just see a man chasing impossible dreams." I remember replying softly, "Sometimes impossible dreams just need a little more time." Charles smiled faintly at the memory now. "She believed in me before there was anything to believe in," he told the room. I looked down, feeling embarrassed. But the truth was more complicated. It wasn't just belief in his success. It was recognition. Thomas and I recognized struggle because we lived it too. That night, after Charles left, we sat at our tiny kitchen table while the rain battered the windows. "He's telling the truth," I whispered. Thomas nodded slowly. "I know he is desperate." "I know." We sat in silence for a few moments before I finally looked up. "What if we help him?" Thomas stared at me carefully. He wasn't angry or shocked, just thoughtful. "How much help are we talking about?" I swallowed hard. "All of it." Even now, 35 years later, I still remember the heavy silence that followed. All of it meant our entire savings, every extra dollar we had spent years building, our emergency fund, money protecting Michael's future, money standing between my family and complete disaster. Finally, Thomas leaned back in his chair and sighed deeply. "You trust him?" "Yes," I said. Thomas looked down at his calloused hands for a long moment, then smiled sadly. "Well," he whispered, "you've always had a better heart than me." I laughed through my tears. "No, just a reckless one." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "No, Abigail," he whispered, "a brave one." Back in the ballroom, I blinked away tears as Charles continued speaking. "The next morning," he said, "they handed me an envelope with nearly every dollar they saved." Several guests looked visibly emotional now, especially the older ones. Because older people understand sacrifice differently. We know what it costs to hand someone your security, your future, and your hope. I asked them why, Charles continued quietly. Why would you risk so much for someone you barely know? Then he looked directly at me, and Abigail said something that changed my entire life. I closed my eyes briefly, already knowing what was coming next. She said, "Money comes and goes, but if kindness disappears, the world becomes unbearable." The room fell silent once more. I felt completely exposed, hearing my own words repeated back after so many years. At the time, they hadn't sounded wise or noble. They had simply sounded true. That sentence stayed with me through every success I have ever had. My son slowly sat down nearby, still looking incredibly pale. His eyes stayed locked on me, like he was seeing his own mother for the very first time. "I don't understand," he whispered. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I slowly turned to face him. That question had waited decades for an answer. "You were so young," I said softly. "But this is huge, Mom." "No," I whispered. "You were the one who was huge." Michael frowned. I kept my voice steady. "Your father and I never wanted you thinking success came from shortcuts or favors." My voice shook. "We wanted you to find your own strength." Michael just stared at me, speechless. Charles gave a quiet nod beside me. She made me promise never to step in unless it was absolutely necessary. Vanessa looked lost. "What do you mean, interfere?" Charles's face softened and he replied calmly, "Michael's MBA scholarship." Michael blinked. "What about it?" Charles held his gaze. "It only existed because your mother asked me to make it." A collective gasp swept the ballroom. Michael swayed, looking pale. "No," he breathed. "That scholarship was based on merit." "It was," Charles said. "You earned every bit of it. But your mother came to me when tuition became impossible after your father passed." My son stared at me as if his whole world was crumbling down. Maybe it was. Sometimes the hardest truth for a child is realizing how much a parent suffered in silence just to keep them safe. He looked completely breathless. He stared at me across the quiet ballroom, wide-eyed, while Charles's words seemed to ring out again. "Your mother asked me to create it." Michael couldn't find his voice. I knew that look instantly. It's the moment a child realizes their parents carried burdens heavier than they ever could have dreamed. "No," he whispered. "That can't be true." Charles stayed perfectly calm. "It is," Michael shook his head. "But the committee said I was chosen because of my grades." "They did," Charles said. "You earned it. But when your father died, your mother came to my office. She was terrified you'd decline the program because of the cost." My chest tightened just remembering it. I had despised that meeting. I hated asking for help, especially after spending my whole life trying to stand on my own. But Thomas had passed away just 3 months before, and his medical bills had drained almost everything we owned. Meanwhile, Michael's MBA acceptance letter sat on our kitchen table, half dream, half threat. I can still hear him saying, "Maybe I should wait a year, Mom." He wanted to wait because he knew the money was gone. That night, with Michael asleep on the couch from pure exhaustion, I sat in the dark, staring at Thomas's picture for 2 hours. The next morning, I called Charles. Not for charity, never that. Just for a chance. "I didn't want you carrying our struggles," I whispered. Michael looked absolutely heartbroken. "You sold Dad's truck after he died," he said slowly, fitting the pieces together. "You told me you just didn't need it anymore." I looked down. "That money paid for your first semester housing." His face fell. "And the life insurance?" Mostly medical bills. Michael pressed a shaking hand to his mouth. The entire ballroom stayed silent. The crowd stopped treating this like gossip. Now it was raw, real, and painful. Vanessa squirmed beside him, desperate to shift the spotlight away from them. But Charles wasn't done. "There is one more thing everyone here should know," he announced. I looked up instantly. "Charles, please." He gave me a gentle smile. "No more hiding the truth." Vanessa went completely rigid. Charles faced the crowd. "When Abigail first invested in my business, I offered her actual shares." The room started whispering again. Nearby investors traded shocked looks. "But she refused to profit off my desperation," Charles continued. "So instead, I created a legacy agreement." Michael frowned. "What's that?" Charles looked straight at him. "It means your mother still owns honorary founding shares in Whitmore Capital." Shocked murmurs erupted. Vanessa's champagne glass nearly slipped from her fingers. Michael stared blankly, but Charles stayed composed. "She's held them for 35 years. I shut my eyes, feeling completely overwhelmed again. Honestly, those shares never mattered to me. I barely even thought about them over the years. But Charles had insisted years ago that if the company survived, a part of it would always belong to my family. Back then, I thought he was just being emotional. We never dreamed Whitmore Capital would grow into a billion-dollar empire. Michael looked absolutely stunned. "Mom," he whispered, "why didn't you tell me?" I looked him in the eyes. "Because I didn't want you growing up feeling entitled." "I'm your son." "Exactly," I whispered, "which is why you needed to build a life on your own terms." Vanessa suddenly found her voice. "Well, honorary shares don't mean actual financial ownership," she muttered, forcing a tight smile. The desperation in her voice was pathetic. She desperately needed this moment to feel smaller, less embarrassing. Charles slowly turned to her. "They include annual dividends," he said calmly. Vanessa went completely white. A few executives nearby looked embarrassed for her. Everyone realized what she'd done. She had mocked an older woman over an $18 dress, never guessing that same woman held a piece of the company her husband worked for. But there was a deeper truth here. I was never humiliated because of being poor. I was hurt because they assumed simple meant worthless. Charles took a step closer to my side. "Abigail has donated nearly every dividend payment over the years," he continued. Even I looked shocked. "Charles, you know it's true." He turned to the crowd. "She funded employee hardship programs anonymously, education grants, emergency assistance for widows," he said, pausing. "And she never wanted any recognition." Michael stared at me like his heart was breaking in real time. "You donated it," he whispered. I shrugged softly. "There were people who needed it more." Vanessa blinked rapidly. "But if you had that kind of money," she stammered, "why live the way you do?" The question hung heavily in the room. Charles looked disappointed, but honestly, I wasn't angry. People like Vanessa genuinely believed wealth existed only to display superiority. The idea of having resources without showing them off made no sense to her. I answered before Charles could. "Because money only changes you if you worship it," I said quietly. The ballroom fell silent again. I continued softly. "Thomas and I spent our whole lives surrounded by hard-working people. Some had money, Some didn't. But the kindest people we ever met were usually the ones who understood struggle. Vanessa looked down immediately. For the first time all night, she couldn't seem to maintain her polished confidence. Meanwhile, Michael looked emotionally shattered. Tears filled his eyes as memories clearly surfaced, one after another. All the birthdays, all the tuition payments, the sacrifices he never questioned because I never allowed him to see the cost. "You worked extra jobs after Dad died?" he whispered suddenly. I nodded slightly. "You told me it was because you liked staying busy." "I needed the insurance." His eyes closed briefly. "And the nights you sounded tired on the phone," I smiled sadly. "I usually finished sewing around 2 in the morning." Michael looked away, unable to hide his tears anymore. That moment hurt me almost as much as the earlier humiliation. No mother wants her child drowning in guilt, even if they deserve some of it. Charles finally placed a hand gently on Michael's shoulder. "Your mother protected your future fiercely," he said quietly. "Everything she did came from love." Michael nodded shakily. Then slowly he turned toward me, and for the first time all night, he looked truly ashamed. Not of me, of himself. The ballroom no longer felt glamorous, not after the truth came out. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled overhead. Champagne still flowed through the crowd. Soft music still drifted from the string quartet near the stage. But underneath all that elegance, something raw and uncomfortable had settled over the room. Reality. And reality is never as polished as wealth tries to make it seem. Michael stood motionless, just a few feet away from me, his face pale and exhausted. The confident executive everyone admired earlier had vanished completely. Now he looked like a lost little boy again. I had not seen that expression since the day Thomas died. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking on the word. My chest tightened instantly. No matter how badly our children hurt us, hearing them sound broken still wounds a mother's heart. I slowly stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my inexpensive navy dress out of habit. Michael looked down at the fabric, the same dress he had silently allowed people to mock. The realization clearly hit him all over again. "I didn't know," he whispered. I gave a small, sad smile. "I know." "No, you don't understand." He shook his head. "I really didn't know any of this." Charles remained nearby, but wisely stayed silent. This was no longer his moment. It belonged to a mother and son standing in the ruins of those years, neither of us fully understanding. Michael swallowed hard before continuing. "All those times you said you were okay." His eyes filled with tears again. "You weren't okay at all." I looked at him gently. Parents don't usually tell their children how scared they are. My words shattered something inside him. He covered his mouth, trying to control his emotions. Several guests nearby looked away, pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Because suffering humbles people, and tonight, my son was finally being humbled. "I thought," Michael choked, struggling for air. "I thought Dad's life insurance covered everything." "It covered enough to survive, but you worked all those extra hours." I nodded softly. There were bills. His eyes dropped to my hands, old hands. Hands shaped by decades of sewing, scrubbing, lifting, surviving. Hands he had stopped seeing years ago. I watched him notice the tiny scars near my fingers for the first time in years. Little white marks left by sewing needles. Thomas used to kiss those scars and call them my badges of love. Michael stared at them silently. Then suddenly, painfully, he asked, "How many times did you skip meals?" The ballroom fell dead silent. Someone set down a wine glass nearby. I hadn't expected that. Not because it wasn't true, but because I never thought he noticed. I tried to smile. "Oh, sweetheart. Please," he whispered, "don't lie to me anymore." My throat tightened, so I answered him honestly. "Sometimes near the end of the month," I admitted softly. But it wasn't a big deal. Michael closed his eyes, as if the words physically hurt him. And maybe they did. Children remember hunger differently when they realize their parents hid it. I remembered one winter so clearly. Michael was 16. His school had this expensive academic trip to Austin, and he desperately wanted to go. The fee wasn't huge by wealthy standards, but for us, it was practically impossible. That month, Thomas and I lived on canned soup and toast for 2 weeks to pay for it. Michael never knew, or so I thought. "I used to hear you in the kitchen at night," he said suddenly. I looked at him carefully. "You did?" "You thought I was asleep," his voice trembled. "I heard you crying sometimes." Tears stung my eyes. We mothers always think we hide our pain so well, but we don't. "I'm sorry," I whispered. His face twisted in utter disbelief. "Sorry?" he repeated. "Mom, why on earth are you apologizing to me?" Because mothers apologize for everything. For the struggle, the grief, and for failing to shield their kids from life, even after sacrificing everything. Michael roughly wiped his eyes, glancing around the ballroom in deep shame. Then his eyes locked onto Vanessa. She stood a few feet away, entirely cut off from the rest of the crowd. Those who laughed with her earlier suddenly avoided her gaze. It is funny how quickly cruelty turns embarrassing when power shifts. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. "I didn't know all this either," she said defensively. No one replied, not even Michael. She drew a shaky breath. "How was I supposed to know?" Charles finally spoke up, cold and calm. "You weren't supposed to know she had money," he said. "You were supposed to treat her with dignity anyway." Those words hit the room like a slap in the face. Vanessa flushed bright red instantly. "I never meant for this." "You did," Michael cut in quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. His voice was soft, which only made it worse. "I heard you laughing," he continued, "and I just let it happen." His eyes drifted back to me. "That is on me." For once tonight, I saw real shame in my son. It wasn't fake guilt or embarrassment from being exposed. This was true shame, the kind that actually changes a person. Charles stepped up beside him. "You're talented, Michael," he said calmly. "You work hard. You have earned your career." Michael nodded weakly. "But character matters far more than talent." The silence in the room stretched. I have seen people build fortunes and still end up spiritually bankrupt. Charles's eyes sharpened. Success means nothing if you forget the very people who carried you there. Michael hung his head in total defeat. "I know." "No," Charles corrected gently. "Tonight you finally understand." Those words hung heavily over all of us, especially me, because deep down, I realized something painful too. I had shielded Michael from struggle so completely that maybe he just forgot what hardship actually felt like. It wasn't intentional. just gradual. Wealth had surrounded him with perfect people, costly venues, and carefully polished facades. Somewhere along the line, he began viewing simplicity as failure, just like Vanessa, only she had actually been raised to think that way. Michael had simply forgotten his roots. "I failed you," he whispered suddenly. I shook my head right away. "No." "Yes." Tears finally spilled down his face. "You stood there while they mocked you, and I cared more about looking good than protecting my own mother." Hearing him admit that aloud cut deep. That was my real wound, not Vanessa's cruelty, but my own son's silence. I stepped closer. "You hurt me tonight," I admitted in a quiet voice. He flinched instantly. "But you are still my son." His face completely broke. "Then I am so sorry, Mom." The words were raw, genuine. For a split second, I almost forgave him entirely. That is the curse of motherhood. We love before we even heal. But before I could speak, Charles cleared his throat. "There is one more thing," Charles said. The room grew tense again as he looked straight at Michael. "The board was going to announce your promotion tonight." Michael blinked, totally confused. "What? You were under consideration for regional partner?" Vanessa's head shot up, but Charles remained completely unreadable. "We're being," he repeated slowly. A chilling silence fell over the entire room. Michael stared at him blankly. Suddenly, everyone in the room realized what those words meant. The quiet that followed was suffocating. "You were being considered for regional partner." Nobody in the room stirred. No one even pretended to drink their champagne. They all knew exactly what had just happened. Michael's future, a promotion he had sweat years for, was suddenly hanging by a thread. Vanessa knew it too. All the remaining color drained from her face. "What does that mean?" she demanded, her voice rising too sharp. "We're being considered," Charles answered calmly. "It means the board and I need more time before making our final choice." Vanessa stared back in shock. "You're delaying his promotion over this?" Charles's eyes hardened. "No," he replied. "I'm delaying it because true leadership shows itself in times like these." The air in the room grew suffocating. Michael hung his head, but Vanessa was far from done. "That is ridiculous," she snapped, losing her filter. "Michael is one of the finest executives here." Nearby, guests exchanged deeply uncomfortable looks. Charles stayed completely calm. "I agree. He is smart, ambitious, and capable. Then this should not matter." "Oh," Charles murmured. "It matters a great deal." His voice stayed perfectly level, which somehow made it much more terrifying. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. "So now we let personal feelings dictate major business decisions?" The moment she said it, Michael closed his eyes in pure frustration. Vanessa still did not get it. This was never about my hurt feelings. It was about his character. Charles took a step toward her. "Mrs. Collins," he said quietly, "do you know why I built support programs into this company?" Vanessa froze. "Because I still remember what it feels like to be treated as worthless when you are struggling." The crowd went dead silent. "I built this firm believing success should make us kinder, not harsher." His eyes grew sharp. Vanessa looked away. For once tonight, her mask slipped, showing genuine fear. But then something ugly broke through the cracks. Pure anger, not regret. She glared at me. "This is completely ridiculous," she hissed. She could have said something sooner. Her words stung more than I expected. Even after all we had been through, Vanessa still believed this was just about money, as if my only mistake was not bragging about my wealth. Charles looked deeply disappointed. Michael was horrified. But Vanessa just kept going, completely out of control. "You let us all think you were poor?" I answered her softly. "I am not wealthy, Vanessa." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You own part of this company." "I only hold honorary shares I never touch. But to her, that still made me rich." I shook my head. "You still don't get it?" Vanessa laughed bitterly. "No, I understand perfectly. You humiliated us on purpose." That finally pushed Michael over the edge. "Stop," he said sharply. Vanessa spun around in shock. "What?" "You need to shut up." Her eyes widened instantly. Michael had never raised his voice to her like that. Not once. But tonight, his years of perfect self-control were shattering right before us. Vanessa stared at him, utterly stunned. "Are you seriously defending her?" she whispered. Michael looked at her like a stranger. "My mother was humiliated in front of everyone." Vanessa scoffed. "She is fine." Something changed in my son's face. Not dramatically, but quietly, like a final thread snapping. "She is not fine," he whispered. I saw it in his eyes. The exact moment my son finally saw me again. Not as an embarrassment to his polished life, but as a mother. A real person who carried him through struggles he had never even bothered to notice. Vanessa looked around nervously, suddenly realizing that the crowd surrounding us was no longer on her side. People watched her closely, judging her the exact same way she had judged me. It's funny how fast a room turns when power shifts. Desperate to regain control, Vanessa forced a brittle smile. "I think this entire evening has just gotten too emotional," she squeaked. Nobody laughed. No one came to her rescue. The heavy silence was brutal. Suddenly, a young server holding a tray of champagne bumped into Vanessa by accident. A tiny splash of champagne hit her silver gown. It was only a few drops, but Vanessa exploded instantly. "Watch where you are going," she snapped. The young server, who looked barely 20, turned pale as a sheet. "I am so sorry, ma'am." "Do you have any idea how expensive this dress is?" The entire ballroom froze. The girl looked terrified. In her eyes, I saw a look I knew all too well. Shame. The kind rich people cause without a second thought. Vanessa kept going angrily. "This is what happens when hotels hire careless staff." Charles's face darkened instantly. The trembling girl kept apologizing. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to." "Obviously you didn't," Vanessa snapped coldly. "But that doesn't make you any less incompetent." Michael looked horrified. "Vanessa," he muttered. But she kept going. People show who they really are when they think someone beneath them has messed up. Tonight, Vanessa Collins was completely unraveling. Charles walked over to the trembling server. He gently took the tray from her shaking hands. "It's all right," he said softly. "Go take a moment." The young woman was near tears. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, quickly slipping away. Charles turned to Vanessa. For the first time tonight, his disgust was unmistakable. "My mother cleaned hotel rooms for 15 years, he said quietly. Vanessa froze. She worked double shifts while people in expensive clothes treated her exactly the way you just treated that girl. No one in the ballroom dared to move. Charles continued calmly, keeping his eyes locked on Vanessa. You truly see a person's character by how they treat those who can do nothing for them. Vanessa's face burned crimson. Michael looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him. Honestly, I almost pitied him. Realizing your partner is cruel is a terrible heartbreak. Charles handed his champagne glass to another server before addressing her again. Effective immediately, he said calmly. Mrs. Collins is removed from the Whitmore Foundation Charity Board. Gasps echoed through the room. Vanessa blinked in disbelief. What? That foundation helps vulnerable families, struggling workers, and students. Charles's voice was ice. You are not suited for that responsibility. You can't be serious. I am entirely serious. Vanessa looked desperately at Michael. Say something. But he just stared at her in silence. Then came the moment that changed everything. For the first time, my son didn't rush to save his wife's reputation. Instead, he looked at her with pure, quiet disappointment. How many times, he asked softly, did you tell me that helping my mother encouraged dependency? Vanessa went pale. My heart stopped as a terrible realization hit me too. Michael looked away bitterly. I thought those were my own thoughts. The room fell dead silent. Her face confessed everything. Her silence spoke louder than words. Michael stared at her as realization slowly fractured his expression, like cracking glass. All those times, he whispered to himself. Every time I wanted to help my mom. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. I was protecting our future. Michael let out a hollow laugh. Our future. He didn't sound angry anymore, just deeply exhausted. You said she needed to learn independence. She does. That final sentence made something permanently harden in my son's eyes. I knew that look. It was the exact same expression Thomas had when someone finally crossed a line he couldn't forgive. She raised me alone after Dad died, Michael murmured softly. She worked herself sick to keep my future alive. Vanessa opened her mouth to reply, but Michael cut her off. And tonight you laughed at her because of a dress. The ballroom fell painfully silent around us. Nobody was pretending to look away anymore. This wasn't entertainment. It was a complete collapse. The crumbling of carefully built images, Vanessa's polished social mask, and Michael's illusion of his own success. Even my own lifelong habit of staying quiet just to keep the peace. Everything was shattering beneath those crystal chandeliers. Vanessa glanced around nervously, realizing she had lost control of the room. You are making me sound heartless, she whispered. Michael stared at her in disbelief. You did that yourself. Those words hit her harder than anything Charles had said all night. Deep down, Vanessa believed Michael would always choose her version of reality over anyone else's, including mine, especially mine. But tonight, for the first time, my son saw the whole picture. And the truth changes people, sometimes very painfully. I quietly grabbed my purse from the chair beside me. The small movement drew Charles's attention right away. You are leaving? He asked gently. I nodded. I think it is time. Michael turned to me instantly. Mom, wait. No, sweetheart. I smiled softly, though my chest still ached. I have had enough attention for one night. Honestly, I felt exhausted, not physically, but emotionally. Years of bottled-up pain had surfaced all at once, and my heart could barely handle it. Charles stepped up beside me immediately. "At least let my driver take you home," Charles offered. "You have already done too much," I replied. His expression softened. "Not even close." I touched his arm gently. "Thomas would be so proud of the man you became." Emotion flashed across Charles's face instantly. For a second, he looked like that struggling young businessman again. Not a billionaire, just a man remembering who once believed in him. "He believed in me before I deserved it," Charles said quietly. "He believed in everybody," I murmured. Charles smiled sadly. "Yes, that is rare." Around us, guests slowly began clapping, softly at first, then louder. The applause startled me completely. I looked around in confusion as dozens of people rose from their seats, one after another. A standing ovation for me. My throat tightened instantly. Only an hour ago, these same people laughed as Vanessa mocked my $18 dress. Now they stood applauding, acting like they always respected me. Funny how fast public opinion shifts when wealth and power redirect it. But strangely, I wasn't angry anymore, just sad. Because kindness should never depend on someone's social status. I looked down at my dress under the ballroom lights, the carefully stitched sleeve, the cheap fabric, the inexpensive shoes. Earlier tonight, wearing this humiliated me. Now, suddenly, I felt no embarrassment. Dignity isn't something expensive people can hand to you. It is something you carry deep inside yourself. Michael stepped closer, carefully, his eyes still red. "Mom," he whispered. I looked at him quietly. "I am sorry." The pain in his voice was genuine. I knew that, but some wounds don't heal the second an apology is made. Not even between mothers and sons. "I know you are," I murmured softly. Tears instantly filled his eyes. "I failed you tonight." I swallowed hard. "Yes," I answered honestly. That single word nearly broke him. But truth matters more than comfort. Michael hung his head. "I don't know how I became this person." My chest tightened painfully. Despite everything, hearing your own child hate themselves still cuts deep. I reached up, gently touching his cheek the way I did when he was little. "You are not a bad man, Michael." His eyes closed instantly. "But tonight," I continued softly, "you are a weak one." Tears streamed down his face, and for once, nobody looked away from his pain. Because accountability hits differently when it's deserved. "I thought success meant fitting in," he whispered. "That's because you spent too much time around people terrified of being ordinary." My eyes shifted to Vanessa, standing frozen, several feet away. Completely isolated now. Not a single person stood beside her anymore. Not one. Her lonely expression looked almost terrifying, yet something inside me refused to completely hate her. Cruel people are usually just deeply insecure. Vanessa built her whole identity around status because she didn't know who she was without it. Still, pain explains bad behavior. It never excuses it. Charles glanced toward the stage. "They are waiting for my speech," he said quietly. I smiled faintly. "Then don't keep your empire waiting." He laughed softly, then grew serious again. "Abigail, before you go." He gently reached for my hand. You spent your whole life giving people dignity when they least deserved it. His eyes glistened slightly. This company exists because of that. Emotion swelled painfully inside my chest. Nobody had ever described my life like that before. I always thought I was just surviving, doing what mothers and decent people do. Nothing extraordinary. But maybe ordinary kindness becomes extraordinary in a world starving for it. Then, Charles did something unexpected, turning back toward the crowd. "Before Mrs. Hernandez leaves tonight," he announced calmly, "there is one thing I want everyone here to remember." The ballroom fell silent immediately. Charles scanned the room slowly before continuing. "A person's value is never stitched into a price tag." My breath caught instantly. Those were my words. Words I'd whispered years ago to a struggling young man in a tiny tailor shop. Those words echoed across one of the wealthiest rooms in Texas. Suddenly, my $18 dress didn't feel cheap anymore. The ballroom exploded with applause again. But this time, I refused to look down in shame. I stood tall, not because they finally respected me, but because I remembered I deserved it long before they ever offered it. Michael walked beside me as I headed toward the exit. Halfway there, he whispered shakily, "I don't deserve your forgiveness yet." I studied his face. "No," I said softly, "you don't." The truth hit him hard, but I kept going before shame crushed him completely. "That doesn't mean you can't earn it." For the first time tonight, a flicker of hope appeared in my son's eyes. 3 days went by before I saw Michael again. 3 long, quiet days. Part of me thought he would just run back to his fancy Dallas life once the embarrassment wore off. People get emotional in public, then slide right back into old habits once they are comfortable again. But deep down, I hoped my son was better than that. On the 3rd morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table, hemming a tiny pink flower girl dress, when I heard a knock. Not the quick tap of a delivery driver or Rose's cheerful pounding. It was slow, hesitant. I knew who it was before even opening the door. Michael stood on my porch in jeans and a wrinkled shirt, instead of his usual expensive suits. Dark circles shadowed his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. For a moment, neither of us said a word. Then he looked down and whispered, "Hi, Mom." The pain in his voice pierced my heart instantly. I stepped aside without saying a word. "Come in." Michael stepped inside slowly, looking around the small house like he was seeing it for the first time. Maybe he was. The worn couch, the faded curtains, family photos on the wall, my sewing machine. None of it had changed, but Michael definitely had. Or maybe the problem was he never noticed how little changed for me, while his own world grew bigger and wealthier every single year. "You still have this?" he asked softly, touching the wooden shelf Thomas built decades ago. "Of course." His fingers traced the worn surface. "I made this with Dad when I was 12. I smiled faintly. "You hit your thumb twice." He laughed weakly before his face fell again. The silence after that was heavy. Not angry, just crowded with things we didn't know how to say. "I made coffee," I murmured. "Want some?" He nodded instantly. As I poured 2 cups at the counter, I could feel him watching me from behind, trying to make sense of all the years he had missed. When I handed him his drink, his eyes welled up with tears again. "You still use Dad's mug." I looked down at the faded ceramic cup. "Some things become a part of you." Michael looked away, hurt by the reminder of how much he had cast aside. People, time, family. He sat down slowly at the table while I went back to hemming that little pink dress. For a few minutes, only the hum of the sewing machine broke the quiet. Finally, Michael whispered, "I haven't stopped thinking about that night." I kept sewing. "I'm glad." My honesty caught him off guard, and he looked up instantly. "You're angry?" I paused before answering softly. "No, I'm hurt." That seemed worse. He rubbed his face with both hands, looking exhausted. "You should be. I was." His voice cracked. "Mom," I looked him in the eyes. "You let people laugh at me." Tears pooled in his eyes. "I know." "You seemed ashamed to be my son." He shook his head. "No. Yes," I interrupted gently. "You did." The heavy truth hung between us. He stared at the table. "I don't know how I became that person." I sighed quietly. "It happened slowly." He looked up. "What?" "Forgetting the people who sacrificed for you." The words weren't cruel, which made them hurt even more. He swallowed hard. "I never forgot you." I smiled sadly. "No, sweetheart. You just forgot what our life cost." Silence fell over the kitchen again. Outside, a dog barked down the street. While sunlight softened the curtains Thomas and I once chose together. This house had witnessed every phase of my son. The little boy, the teenager, the successful businessman, and now a man trying to face himself honestly at last. Michael slowly looked down at my hands. "Do you still sew every day?" "I like staying busy." "You always say that when you're struggling." His observation startled me. Maybe my son noticed more than I realized. Just not enough. "I should have helped you more," he whispered. "You sent money sometimes." There were months Vanessa insisted sending too much would make you dependent. Shame flooded his face as I just listened. I studied his expression. Why? Because I started believing success meant leaving struggle behind completely. My chest tightened. "And what exactly does that mean?" "That poor people stay poor because they don't try." He looked physically sick. God, I actually started thinking like that. I stared at him. Hearing your child repeat such cruel beliefs feels like mourning someone who is still alive. Michael quickly wiped his eyes. "But seeing you in that ballroom," his voice broke, "I realized the strongest person I know spent her whole life struggling." I gently set down my sewing. "You know what hurts most?" He shook his head. It wasn't Vanessa laughing. Tears spilled down his cheeks. It was you staying quiet. Michael broke down completely, raw grief finally pouring out of him. "I'm sorry," he whispered over and over. "Mom, I'm so sorry." He sobbed like a child after a nightmare, raw, uncontrolled, and completely broken. My first instinct was still to comfort him. That is motherhood. Even a wounded heart will always reach for its child. I crept over slowly, resting my hand on his hair. Michael leaned into me right away, like he'd been starving for love for years. "I failed Dad, too," he choked out through tears. My own eyes welled instantly. Oh, sweetheart. He would have hated who I became that night. I thought of Thomas for a long, quiet moment. I answered him honestly. He would have hated your choices. I gently touched Michael's cheek. But never you. Michael wept harder then. Fathers like Thomas love so deeply, they leave echoes that linger long after they're gone. Finally, Michael looked around the cramped kitchen. The aging fridge, worn linoleum, faded curtains. Then he whispered something that completely broke my heart. "You stayed here alone all this time?" I offered a sad smile. "This house still feels full because of your father." "Yes," his voice shook. "And because of me." I studied my son, answering with absolute truth. "Because every sacrifice we made here built your life." Tears kept streaming down his face. Michael drew a ragged breath. "I don't deserve to be forgiven." I let that sit for a second. Then I spoke softly. "No, not yet." Pure agony flashed across his face. Before despair took him over, I kept going. "Forgiveness isn't just words, Michael." He stared in silence. "It's real change." The room fell dead silent. "You want my forgiveness?" I asked softly. "Then become the man your dad always believed you were." Michael stared at me through his tears. For the first time in years, I think my son realized that success doesn't prove love. It's proven by character. But change didn't happen overnight. Real change never does. We love dramatic apologies because they're satisfying. One emotional speech, a tearful moment, a grand gesture. But character isn't rebuilt in a single night. It's rebuilt slowly, day after day, in the quiet moments. To Michael's credit, he tried. The first sign came next Sunday. I was watering the roses by the porch when his sleek luxury SUV pulled up again. This time, there were no expensive loafers or pressed designer shirts, just jeans, sneakers, and pure anxiety written all over him. "You didn't have to drive 3 hours just to visit," I said as he approached. Yes, I did. A simple answer, no excuses. He spent the entire afternoon helping me fix the broken fence out back. For the first hour, we barely spoke. But this time, the silence didn't feel cold or distant. It felt fragile, like two people learning to connect again. I caught him staring at his hands while tightening a loose board. "What is it?" I asked. He gave a weak laugh. "Forgot how tough manual labor is." "That's because you sit in meetings all day." He looked down. Dad did this after 12-hour shifts. The guilt still weighed heavily on him. I saw it in everything. How he noticed the little things. How he looked at the house with new eyes. The way he actually listened instead of constantly checking his phone. Awareness changes people. And sometimes that awareness really hurts. Later, over iced tea on the porch, Michael finally asked the question that had been haunting him. "Do you think Dad would be disappointed in me?" I stared out at our quiet street before answering. Thomas always believed we should be judged by what we do after we fail. Michael stayed quiet, so I kept going. "Your father made mistakes too." He frowned. "Dad?" I smiled gently. "Oh, sweetheart. Your father once lost 6 months of rent money because he trusted the wrong partner." Michael blinked, stunned. "He never told me." "Well, parents usually hide their worst moments from their kids." He stared thoughtfully at his glass. "What happened?" "He worked 2 jobs until we recovered." I smiled at the memory. Every night, he'd say the exact same thing. "What?" "I will never let pride matter more than people." Michael's eyes welled up. I could tell those words hit him hard. Over the next few weeks, he kept coming back. Not because he had to, by choice. He brought groceries, even when I protested. He fixed things around the house that had been broken for years while I was trying to save money. One Saturday, I walked in and found him swapping out the kitchen faucet. "You hired a plumber?" I teased. Michael shook his head from under the sink. "No, I watched some videos." I let out a soft laugh. "You used to hate fixing things." I used to hate a lot of honest things. Those words stayed with me all day. Meanwhile, his marriage was clearly crumbling. He avoided talking about her at first, but pain always leaks out. While helping me organize old photos one evening, he suddenly spoke up. "She thinks I'm ruining our future." I set an album aside. "Because you're spending time with me?" "Because I'm changing." I looked at him quietly. "And are you?" He nodded slowly. "Yes." No pride, just raw honesty. That mattered. A few days later, on a Thursday evening, he surprised me by showing up unannounced again. Only this time, Vanessa was with him. Seeing her step out of the car, a familiar tension instantly gripped my chest. Vanessa looked completely out of place standing before my small home. She wore expensive cream-colored clothes, far too elegant for this, as if she couldn't exist without being flawless. Michael gave her a firm look before speaking. "Vanessa has something to say." She glared at him, then at me, before looking away. After a few agonizing seconds of silence, she let out a quiet sigh. "I owe you an apology." Her words were stiff and forced, but apologies from proud people rarely sound natural. I just waited. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively before forcing herself to speak. "What I said at the gala was cruel," she admitted. "Yes, it was. But I stayed quiet and judged you unfairly." That was true. She swallowed hard, her eyes lowering briefly. "I grew up around people who only cared about appearances. I thought success meant never looking poor," she said. There it was. Not kindness, but raw honesty. That was more than I expected. My son Michael watched her closely, not trying to rescue her, just waiting to see if she would speak the truth. Vanessa finally looked at me awkwardly. "When I saw your dress that night," she hesitated, "I thought you didn't belong." I offered a sad smile. A lot of people did. Her face tightened. For the first time, I think she understood that cruelty lingers in the heart long after the initial embarrassment fades away. "I was wrong," she whispered at last. The apology was clumsy, with no grace, but it felt real. Sometimes that is where real change begins. I nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that." Relief washed over her, but I kept talking before she could mistake my forgiveness for forgetting. "However," I added gently, "you don't get to treat people badly just because you regret it later." Vanessa instantly looked down. "I know." "No," I corrected softly. "You are just beginning to learn." Silence fell over the porch. Then Michael surprised us both. He reached for my hand without a shred of hesitation or shame. The son who once stayed silent while they laughed sat proudly beside me now. That simple touch meant more than any speech. Vanessa saw it too. I think she finally realized something incredibly important in that moment. My son was no longer willing to build his identity on other people's approval. Later that evening, while Vanessa waited in the car, Michael helped me wash dishes in the kitchen. As he dried a plate, he quietly asked if she could change. I thought carefully before responding. People only change when losing what they love hurts more than protecting their pride. My son nodded slowly. And if they don't? I looked at him closely. Then you have to decide what kind of life you want to live. He stood silent for a few moments, then whispered, I spent years trying to be successful. He looked up at me. But I think this is the first time in a long while I actually respect myself. My throat tightened. That was the moment I knew his heart had shifted. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And genuine change is rare. 1 year later, I stood in front of my mirror, holding that same navy blue dress. The $18 dress that once made an entire ballroom laugh at me. My fingers brushed the fabric as evening sunlight spilled through the curtains. Over this past year, I had patched up the stitching twice more. I added soft lining to the sleeves and swapped the cheap buttons for simple pearl ones Michael bought for me when visiting San Antonio. The dress still was not expensive or glamorous, but somehow it no longer looked so small, and neither did I. A soft knock sounded at the door. I smiled as I opened it, already knowing who was there. Michael stood before me in a dark navy suit, holding white roses. This time, there was no distance in his eyes, no shame, just pure warmth. You look beautiful, Mom, he said right away. And this time, I actually believed him. I laughed softly. You haven't even seen the whole dress yet. I don't need to. Tears welled in my throat because a year ago, my son judged value strictly by outward appearances. Now, he saw the person first. That growth mattered more than any promotion. Driving toward Dallas, my son talked about community programs and the employee scholarship funds he had spent the year expanding. Charles had approved his promotion 6 months ago. Not just for his performance, but because of his real growth. There is a difference, and he understood that now. Charles keeps pushing the mentorship program, he said as he drove. He says leadership is about protecting people, not intimidating them. I smiled. That sounds exactly like him. He glanced at me. He talks about you all the time. I shook my head, feeling a bit embarrassed. He is exaggerating. No, Michael replied softly. I think he finally met someone who showed him what success really looks like. I turned to the window, hiding my tears. Some compliments are still too heavy to carry. Walking into the Grand Meridian Hotel, old memories rushed back so sharply I nearly froze. The same marble floors, glowing chandeliers and ballroom. A year ago, I had walked in here feeling completely invisible. Tonight felt different. Not because they finally respected me, but because I respected myself enough to never shrink back again. Michael walked around the car and proudly offered me his arm in public view. No hesitation. That small act nearly broke my heart. Walking into the ballroom, the chatter died down. But this time, there were no mocking stares. Many of the guests smiled warmly instead. People actually approached us to shake my hand. A few older women whispered thanks for the speech I gave after leaving last year. Apparently, my words about a person's value not being stitched into a price tag had spread fast. Funny how truth travels once people actually hear it. Near the entrance, Charles Whitmore spotted us. His face lit up instantly. There she is, he announced warmly to those around him. Before I could move, he crossed the floor to hug me. This time, the embrace felt peaceful, like family reuniting rather than past mistakes colliding. You kept the dress, he smiled. Of course. He stepped back a bit to look at it. Well, he laughed softly, it is officially the most famous dress in Texas now. I covered my face, embarrassed. Please do not say that. But he quickly turned serious. Do you know how many letters our foundation got after last year? I blinked. Hundreds, he said. Women writing about divorce, bankruptcy, and starting over in their 60s. His eyes softened. You make people feel seen. A painful ache swelled in my chest. I had spent my whole life thinking survival was just ordinary. But maybe surviving becomes powerful when it helps someone else feel less alone. Soft music drifted through the crowded ballroom as guests kept pouring in. That was when I spotted Vanessa standing by a table across the room. For a second, our eyes locked. She seemed different. Still elegant and polished, but quieter now, with none of her old sharp edges. She slowly made her way over. Beside me, Michael went rigid, not from fear, but out of pure protectiveness. Vanessa stopped just a few feet away. You look lovely tonight, Abigail, she said softly. Her sincerity caught me off guard. Thank you, I replied. After an awkward silence, she looked down. I volunteer twice a month now at the Women's Transitional Housing Center. I blinked, stunned. That is wonderful, she nodded quietly. It took me a long time to realize how cruel I'd become. Her honesty felt genuine this time, humble and completely undefended. Pain humbles us, if we let it. Vanessa looked out at the crowded ballroom. There are women there who remind me of how I treated you. Her voice strained, and honestly, it makes me sick. I watched her closely. For once, I saw real vulnerability in her, instead of a performance. Not perfection, but humanity. That feeling is called growth, I offered gently. Tears welled in her eyes. She gave a single nod, quietly excused herself, and slipped away. Michael watched her go in silence. Then he turned to me. You really forgave her. I offered a sad smile. Forgiveness and trust are two very different things. He chuckled softly. Yeah, he admitted. I learned that lesson this year, too. A moment later, Charles stepped up onto the ballroom stage. The room went completely silent. He threw a warm smile my way before speaking. 1 year ago, he began, something life-changing happened in this very room. The guests hung on his words. Many arrived tonight believing success is measured by wealth, status, and outward appearances. His gaze swept slowly across the room. But one woman proved to us that dignity can never be bought. A deep silence fell. Charles continued. Tonight, Whitmore Capital is proud to launch a national scholarship supporting women over 55 who are rebuilding their lives after facing immense hardship. Applause instantly erupted. Charles looked straight at me, smiling. We are deeply honored to name it the Abigail Hernandez Foundation. My breath caught in my throat. The entire room stood up to applaud. But this time, my eyes welled up for a completely different reason. It wasn't from humiliation. It was healing. Michael squeezed my hand tightly, and in that beautiful moment, a profound truth washed over me. The ultimate justice isn't watching mean people fall. It's refusing to let their cruelty poison who you are at your core. I looked down at my old navy dress one last time. The very dress people once mocked had transformed into something else entirely. It was proof that dignity survives humiliation and kindness outlasts wealth. Proof that an $18 dress can carry breathtaking grace when worn by someone who refused to let the world harden her heart. After everything, I've learned a vital lesson. Life is always going to throw people in your path who measure human worth by money, looks, status, or success. Some will mistake your kindness for weakness, while others only show respect to the powerful. But true character is revealed in how we treat those who can do absolutely nothing for us. For years, I believed that sacrifice meant staying silent, no matter how terribly I was treated. I thought love meant quietly taking humiliation. But I finally realized my dignity matters too. You can be incredibly kind without letting yourself be diminished. You can forgive while still knowing your worth. Sometimes the people we love hurt us, not because they're bad, but because they simply lose sight of what truly matters. Pride, ego, and insecurity will slowly warp who you are if you stop guarding your heart. All that matters is if they're willing to change when truth finds them. Michael changed because he chose humility over his own ego. Vanessa changed because shame forced her to look in the mirror. And I changed because I stopped apologizing for surviving. If you're watching this right now, while struggling financially, emotionally, or personally, please remember this. Your worth has never depended on the price tag of your clothes, your home, your job, or your bank account. Real dignity comes from how you love, how you sacrifice, endure, and keep showing kindness in a world that easily forgets its value. If this touched your heart, please like and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been judged unfairly because of money, your looks, or where you came from? And let me know where you're watching from and the time in your city right now. Your stories mean more than you know.